They gave me 10 minutes to defend my own home. 10 minutes to prove I hadn't broken a single rule, using nothing but a shed I already had written approval to build. Diane Whitfield sat at the head of that table, arms crossed, smiling like she'd already won. She had no idea I'd brought copies of every email she probably wished she'd never sent. By the time that hearing ended, she wasn't smiling anymore. My name's Jason. I'm 38. I fix HVAC systems for a living. And 3 years ago, my wife Rachel and I bought a modest 4-bedroom on Larkspur Court in Maple Ridge Estates. A quiet tree-lined subdivision about 20 minutes outside the city, the kind of place with mowed lawns, minivans in driveways. And a community Facebook group that mostly argued about leaf blowers. We weren't rich. We saved for 6 years for that down payment. When we finally got the keys, I remember standing in the empty backyard thinking, this is ours now. Nobody could ever take that feeling away from us. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. Maple Ridge had an HOA like most subdivisions built after 2005. $52 a month, mostly for the community pool and the entrance landscaping. For the first 2 years, I barely thought about it. I mowed my lawn on Saturdays, waved at neighbors, coached my son's little league team on weekends. Normal life. The board president was a woman named Diane Whitfield, mid-50s, always in a blazer even at backyard barbecues, the kind of person who introduced herself by her title before her name. Diane Whitfield, HOA president, she'd say, like it was printed on a business card in her head. She lived in Maple Ridge for 11 years and ran the board the way some people run small kingdoms, with rules for everything, memorized selectively and enforced unevenly depending on who you were. I didn't have a problem with Diane at first. We nodded at community meetings. She complimented my Christmas lights once, but that was before the shed. It started in April on a Tuesday evening, the kind where the sky stays orange until almost 8. Rachel and I had been talking for months about getting a proper storage shed, somewhere to keep the lawn equipment, my son's bike, the kayak that had been living under a tarp since we moved in. I did what I thought was the responsible thing. I pulled up the Maple Ridge HOA architectural guidelines, found the Architectural Review Committee application form and filled it out completely. Dimensions, 10 feet by 12 feet. Material, cedar siding to match the house trim. Setback, 8 feet from the property line, which exceeded the required 6. I attached photos, a sketch, even the manufacturer's spec sheet. I emailed it directly to the ARC chair at the time, a man named Robert Kessler, on April 9th. Robert wrote back 4 days later. His email said, and I'm quoting from memory because I still have the original, "Application approved as submitted. Please proceed. Notify the board once installation is complete for final walkthrough." I printed that email. I saved it in 3 places: my inbox, a folder on my laptop, and a printed copy in a manila folder in our filing cabinet, right next to our mortgage documents. Call it a habit from working a trade where paperwork protects you. I never imagined I'd need it for something like a shed. The shed went up over a long weekend in May. My brother-in-law helped me pour the concrete pad. We built it exactly to spec, cedar siding, matching shingles, painted the same warm gray as our house trim. Rachel planted hydrangeas along the base. It looked, if I'm being honest, better than half the sheds already standing in Maple Ridge. I sent the completion notice to the board on May 30th, CCing Robert Kessler, exactly like his email had instructed. For 3 months, nothing happened. Summer came and went. My son kept his bike in there. I kept my mower in there. Then, on a Thursday in September, everything changed. I came home from a service call to find a bright yellow notice zip-tied to our front door, violation notice in bold at the top. Unauthorized accessory structure, garden shed, installed without Architectural Review Committee approval. Remove within 30 days or incur a daily fine of $100 beginning October 15th. I stood on my own porch reading that letter twice because I genuinely thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe a new board member, maybe a clerical mix-up. I walked inside, pulled the manila folder from the filing cabinet and called the HOA management office that same night. The woman I spoke to said she'd flag it for the board and someone would follow up. Nobody did. So 4 days later, I drove to the community clubhouse where the board held their monthly meeting, folder in hand, expecting a 2-minute conversation that would clear the whole thing up. That's not what I got. Diane Whitfield ran that meeting from the head of the table, and when I brought up the shed during the open comment period, she didn't even let me finish my sentence. "Mr. Ramsey, there is no record of ARC approval for your structure," she said, flat, like she was reading it off a script. "Robert Kessler is no longer on this board, and unfortunately his personal email correspondence was never entered into the official file." I told her I had the email right there in my hand. I held up the printed page. "That's not how the process works," she said. Approvals must be documented through the management portal. An email is not a binding approval. Then why did your own guidelines tell people to email the ARC chair directly? I asked. That's literally what the form said to do. She didn't answer that. She moved on to the next agenda item like I'd stopped talking. Somebody 2 seats down from her, a board member named Carl, wouldn't even make eye contact with me. I left that meeting with my folder still in my hand and a fine clock that was already running. I want to be honest about something. For about a week after that meeting, I genuinely considered just tearing the shed down. Rachel and I sat at the kitchen table one night doing the math. $100 a day was $700 a week, $3,000 a month. We couldn't absorb that indefinitely, not with a mortgage and a kid in travel baseball. Diane knew that math too. I think she was counting on it, but something kept nagging at me. If the email wasn't valid, why did the ARC application form specifically instruct applicants to submit directly to the chair's email? Why had Robert Kessler, a man who'd served on that board for 6 years, told me in writing that I was approved? And why, out of every homeowner in Maple Ridge, including at least 4 other sheds I could see from my own street, none of them cedar-matched, none of them 8 feet off the line, was mine suddenly the one under a microscope? I started asking around carefully. And that's when a neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Pam who'd lived in Maple Ridge since it was built, told me something that changed everything. Back in July, my property had come up in a board discussion, not about the shed, but because I'd publicly disagreed with Diane on the neighborhood Facebook group about a proposed special assessment for repaving the entrance road. I'd posted politely that I thought the board should get 3 competing bids instead of approving the first contractor Diane recommended, who happened to be her cousin's company. Pam said Diane hadn't forgotten that. I didn't have proof of a connection yet, but I had a theory. And 2 weeks later, I got something better than a theory. I got a certified letter. It arrived on a Saturday, thick cardstock HOA letterhead signed by Diane Whitfield as board president. It stated the shed remained in violation, that fines had accrued to $1,100 as of that date, and that if the structure wasn't removed within 14 days, the HOA would place a lien on our property and refer the matter to their attorney for further collection action. A lien on our house, over a shed that had been sitting there quietly for 4 months with 0 complaints from a single actual neighbor. Rachel read that letter standing in the kitchen and went completely silent for a full minute. Then she looked at me and said, "Jason, they can't just take our house over this. Can they?" I didn't have an answer for her, not yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't tearing that shed down and I wasn't rolling over either. If Diane Whitfield wanted a fight over paperwork, I was going to give her one, and I was going to make sure every single piece of it was documented better than anything sitting in that HOA's file cabinet. That same night, I pulled up the Maple Ridge governing documents in full, not just the summary page most homeowners skim, but the actual recorded covenants, conditions, and restrictions, 41 pages of dense legal language most people never bother reading until they're forced to. Buried in Section 7. 3 was a line I hadn't noticed before. Any homeowner disputing a violation notice was entitled to a formal hearing before the board and had the right to present evidence, call witnesses, and record the proceedings for their own records. Diane clearly hadn't expected anyone to actually invoke it. In 11 years of running that board, according to Pam, nobody ever had. The next morning I went back through everything, every email, every text, every screenshot. I found something I'd almost forgotten about, a message thread in the neighborhood Facebook group from back in June, where I'd posted a photo of the finished shed with the caption, "Finally done, thanks Robert for the quick ARC turnaround." Diane had commented on that post. One word: nice. Dated June 3rd, public, time-stamped, still visible because nobody had ever thought to delete it. That single word was going to matter more than she could have imagined. I also requested, in writing, copies of the official ARC meeting minutes for April through June under the HOA's own governing documents, which required the board to produce records to any member upon request within 10 business days. Diane's management company stalled for 3 weeks. When the minutes finally came, buried on page 4 of a packet was a single line from the April board meeting. ARC report: 3 applications reviewed and approved by R. Kessler, including 1701 Larkspur CT shed. My address, in their own official minutes, approved. I now had 4 separate, independent pieces of evidence: Robert's original approval email, my completion notice sent and never disputed at the time, Diane's own public comment acknowledging the finished shed in June, and the board's own meeting minutes confirming the ARC had approved it in April. 4 documents. All of them created by the HOA itself, or in plain public view where Diane had personally participated. I requested a formal hearing, as was my right under the HOA's bylaws, and I asked for it to be recorded, which the bylaws also permitted. Diane's tone in her reply email was noticeably different this time, shorter, colder, no longer bothering with pleasantries. She scheduled it for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse meeting room, same room where she'd cut me off before. I walked in that night with a manila folder that had grown considerably thicker. Rachel came with me. Robert Kessler, the former ARC chair, came too. Pam had helped me track down his number, and when I explained what was happening, he didn't hesitate. He said Diane had never liked him much either, and he'd be glad to set the record straight in person. Diane sat at the head of the table again, same blazer energy, flanked by 3 board members. She opened the hearing formally, stating for the recording that homeowner Jason Ramsey was present to appeal violation notice number 4471 regarding an unauthorized accessory structure. Mr. Ramsey, she said, you may present your case, briefly. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. I laid the documents on the table one at a time, sliding copies to each board member as I went. April 9th, my ARC application submitted exactly as instructed by your own guidelines. I slid it across. April 13th, Robert Kessler's written approval on official ARC letterhead email. I slid the second copy. Robert, sitting beside me, simply nodded and said, I approved that application myself. I remember the file specifically because it was one of the cleaner submissions I reviewed that year. Diane's jaw tightened, but she said nothing yet. May 30th. My completion notice sent to this board undisputed for 4 months. Third document. And finally, I said, sliding the last page across, your own board's meeting minutes from April, which you certified and approved yourself at the following month's meeting. Line item 4, my address listed as approved. Silence. One of the board members, a younger man named Miguel, actually leaned forward to read it twice. Diane, Miguel said slowly, still looking down at the page, you certified these minutes yourself. Your signature is on the cover sheet. I certify dozens of pages a month, she snapped back a little too quickly. I don't personally verify every line item. That's kind of the point of certifying them, Robert said quietly, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep a straight face. There's also this, I added, and placed a printed screenshot on top of the pile. Your public comment on my Facebook post from June 3rd congratulating me on the completed shed. Nice. Timestamped. Still online right now if anyone wants to check. Diane's face had gone from composed to visibly pale. That comment is irrelevant, she said, her voice tighter now. Social media isn't part of the official record. Maybe not, I said, but it does show you personally saw the finished structure back in June and raised no objection. The violation notice wasn't filed until September, 3 months later. Right around the same week I publicly disagreed with you on the repaving contract. I hadn't planned to say that last part out loud, but watching her face when I did told me everything I needed to know. Miguel spoke up before Diane could respond. I'd like to move that we table this violation pending further board review, he said. Carl, the board member who wouldn't look at me during the first meeting, quietly agreed. Diane tried to object, started to speak about process integrity, but Miguel cut in, calm but firm. Diane, the minutes are right there, we approved it. This isn't up for debate. The hearing that was supposed to determine whether we'd lose thousands of dollars or worse lasted 8 minutes and 40 seconds. I know because Robert was timing it on his phone, mostly out of spite, and told me afterward with a grin. 2 days later, we received a formal letter from the HOA management company. The violation notice was withdrawn in full. All accrued fines were canceled. No lien would be filed. The letter didn't apologize. HOA letters rarely do, but it didn't need to. The documents had already said everything that needed saying. I wish I could tell you Diane Whitfield learned some grand lesson of humility that night. She didn't, not right away. But word travels fast in a neighborhood of 400 houses. And by the time the annual board election rolled around the following spring, 3 other homeowners had come forward, with strikingly similar disputes that had quietly gone away the moment paperwork got involved, disputes that always seemed to land on people who'd crossed Diane in some small public way. She lost that election by a wide margin. Miguel became the new board president. One of his first actions was implementing a rule requiring every ARC decision to be logged in a shared digital system within 48 hours, visible to every homeowner, no exceptions, no gatekeeping through any one person's inbox. The shed is still standing on Larkspur Court. Rachel's hydrangeas came back this spring, bigger than last year. My son still keeps his bike in there. Sometimes, on a slow Saturday, I'll walk past it with a cup of coffee and think about how close we came to tearing it down out of pure fear. How close we came to just paying a fine we never legally owed because it felt easier than fighting. Here's what I took away from all of it. An HOA board isn't a government. It doesn't get to invent the rules as it goes, and it definitely doesn't get to punish you quietly for disagreeing with the person holding the gavel. But it will absolutely try if it thinks nobody's keeping records. The moment you start keeping better records than they do, the entire balance of power shifts. That's not a legal trick. It's just paperwork kept honestly and used at exactly the right moment. If you've ever had a fight with an HOA, a landlord, or anybody who thought a title gave them the final word, you already know that feeling of sitting across the table with your evidence in hand, watching their story fall apart in real time. If this one hit close to home, tell me in the comments where your own fight happened. Stick around if you want more stories just like this one. There are a lot more homeowners out there who kept their receipts, and every single one of their stories deserves to be told.